This is the brand new Sony 16-25 f2.8G lens, Sony's first compact wide-angle zoom lens with a constant f2.8 aperture. Now, you might be thinking,
but Ken, haven't I already seen this lens before?
well, in a way, you have. This new 16-25 is strikingly similar to the recently released 24-50 f2.8G. This is just the wide-angle brother. But honestly, it's more than that. There's a few things that make it probably the best wide-angle lens for the money. Let me explain. Now, a quick disclaimer, Sony did send me this lens to test out, but they have no say in what I say, and they don't get to see this video before you do. In fact, once they see what I've done with this loaner lens, they might be the last one that they send, we'll see. From a build standpoint, it basically looks exactly like the Sony 24-50G, which we've already discussed at length on this channel just a few weeks ago. So in a way, it feels like we've already done this review. In other ways, I think you're gonna wanna see what opportunities this lens unlocks, but let's just bang out the similarities really quickly, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty. It's got the constant f2.8 aperture, dedicated focus, zoom, and aperture rings with a declicked aperture switch, making it great for video shooters. It has the same manual focus switch and programmable focus hold button that we've come to expect on all of Sony's newer G Master lenses as well. It features the same 16.7mm thread, and the small size makes it great for the A7C II, A7CR, or ZV-E1, but it also fits really nicely on the larger cameras like the A7 series or the FX series. The autofocus is crazy fast and responsive on this lens as well. It only has two normal linear motors rather than the more expensive XD linear motors, but with it being so much smaller, the XD linear motors are honestly probably a little bit overkill and would make the lens larger than it needs to be. With this being a native lens, the autofocus can keep up with 4K 120 or high burst rates in photo mode as well. Like the 24-50, this lens is at its smallest at the largest focal length and then fully extends when at 16mm. This was a bit strange with the 24-50, but it tends to be more common for wide-angle lenses, and the length of the extension is much less than the 24-50 as well. When it's at 25, it's basically the same dimensions as the 24-50, but it's a little bit lighter at only 409 grams. Now, all of this size and smallness is great and all, but it doesn't really matter if it performs poorly. Luckily for us, that's not the case. Honestly, I'd say this outperforms the original version of the 16-35 G Master in a number of categories, which is crazy given it's like literally half the size and weight. It's got an 11-bladed aperture for that creamy smooth bokeh and beautiful out of focus elements, and it's got razor sharp sun stars as a result as well. This thing is also incredibly sharp, even at the corners. Like, I'm really impressed with how well this thing performs, and it almost makes me wonder why I paid so much more for my G Master set. I mean, look at this. This was shot on the Sony A1, and if we punch in to see how sharp and detailed it is, it's fantastic. Like, the G Master Mark II is better, don't get me wrong, but when we talk about price in a minute, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Sony seems to have figured something out with their lenses because almost all of them have a really impressive minimum focusing distance now. This one is rocking an 18cm minimum focusing distance at 16mm and then 24cm focusing distance at 25mm. While this is by no means a macro lens, having the ability to get close-ups adds nicely to the versatility of this lens, and I personally really like the look of a wide field of view with a close focus because you're still able to get close-ups but still provide context around it. Now, when we talk about wide-angle lenses, especially cheaper ones, they usually suffer from a few key issues. First, they often experience really bad chromatic aberration, especially at the wider end of the focal range. Luckily for us, again, there's basically none of that with the 16-25. You can even see here, even with chromatic aberration adjustments turned off, in a pretty difficult chromatic aberration-y setting, we pretty much have nothing. Next, it's really common for them to be nice and sharp in the middle, but then that sharpness falls off as we get out towards the edges. With this lens, I actually found it to be very impressive across the entire frame. Comparing it against the Tamron 70-28, which I know is likely a popular consideration against this lens, it's noticeably sharper, not just at the corners, but at the center as well. It's again, not quite as good as a 16-35G Mark II, but it's probably fair to put it about on par with the original 16-35G Master. By the way, all of these photos are edited with my Master Pack Lightroom presets, and for these shots, I've also added my one-click Orton effect Photoshop action to give it a little bit of that extra dreamy look. If you want to download that action, I'll leave it linked in the description. It's completely free to download, but if you want to say thank you by hitting the subscribe button, I would really appreciate it. Another common issue with wide angles is vignetting and distortion. Honestly, while I was out shooting with it, I didn't really notice any of this at all, but reviewing the files later, you can definitely see that there is indeed some vignetting and barrel distortion that's present. The vignetting to me isn't that bad, but even if we apply just the 16-35 GM lens profile, it's almost all remedied. We also typically see issues with flaring. When I was in the field, I honestly was trying to get some flares and I was doing my best to get them, but I didn't really find any, so I decided to put it to the test even more in the studio. There definitely were some lens flares, and when we compare it to the 16-35 G Master II, it certainly is much more noticeable. But if we compare it against the Tamron 17-28, it's actually pretty much, I don't know, on par. Okay, so with all that said, we have to come back to this kind of bold claim that I made earlier that this is the best wide angle lens for the money. And here's why I feel confident with this. I honestly think that this is the best combination of size, optical performance, close focusing, and feature set for both photo and video shooters. Now, I know a lot of folks are gonna wish that this was an internally zooming lens, and I definitely do too. But honestly, the zoom is so minimal that it might as well be. With modern gimbals being as strong as they are, you honestly don't need to worry about rebalancing when you adjust the focal length. The size of this thing makes it absolutely perfect for travel. It basically takes up no space in the bag, and if you're pairing it with something like the 24-50 or a similar compact standard zoom, you can basically get by with as little as like a sling and just call it a day. Beyond just travel or gimbals, you can do so many stupidly ridiculous things with this lens. Like I took a friction arm and did this snorri cam style rig with just 2 FX3s. Because of the small size and the close focusing, you can pull off these awesome shots without needing some crazy big rig or a dedicated macro lens. I also put together this short little segment of my buddy's overlanding rig, filmed entirely on the 16-25. It's super easy to rig this thing out with the FX3 and drive around on some dirt roads without any issues. And even better if you have one of the smaller Sony cameras. If you were to try to get this level of image quality otherwise, you're looking at a huge, expensive car rig just to hold the weight of a larger lens. And a disclaimer, always, please use a safety cable if you're gonna try one of these shots. Otherwise,
gonna have a bad time.
Now, I will say, while this is an incredible little wide angle lens, I don't think this is a single one and done lens. There are a lot of times when 25 isn't gonna cut it, whereas 35 probably would. But I will say that this thing is sharp enough that if you have one of the larger megapixel sensors, you can crop pretty comfortably like I've done here. If it were me, I'd probably pair this with the 24-50G, and you're looking at an awesome 2-lens kit that's super affordable because this thing is priced at only $10.99 US. So I know a lot of you are sitting here thinking,
But Cal, what about the Tamron? You forgot about my Sigma lens that I love so much. What about the 16-35 power zoom?
So yes, these are all alternatives that you might already own or be considering, but let's take a look at the feature set side by side. In my mind, the 16-25 stands heads above the rest from a value standpoint. You know, if money isn't an issue, I think you go for the 16-35 G Master Mark II because it does remain the gold standard for wide angle zooms for the Sony system. But for the price of just that, you can get this, the 16-25 and the 24-50, and you still have all the same features, and you have a great kit that you can basically bring with you anywhere. And if you want to bring more videos like this with you everywhere, be sure to hit subscribe. I make new videos like this every week. So I'll see you in the next one. Peace.